Our guest this morning from Montreal is the Federal Environment Minister Catherine McKenna. Thank you very much for giving us some time on this busy day and in that very busy foyer. I appreciate Minister McKenna. Thanks.
No problem.
You know, why don't we just jump ahead a little bit? I was going to ask you about Doug Ford, but that set things up so beautifully for our conversation. Ontario Premier Doug Ford attending his First Minister's meeting, likely wishing to make his presence felt. You know what he feels about your carbon tax. He calls it the job-killing carbon tax, and he doesn't want to hear anything about it, and he may walk out during your presentation. How do you plan to deal with Doug Ford today?
Look, this is a really important conversation. It was 2 years ago, actually, that First Ministers came together, premiers came together around a national climate plan, also a plan to grow the economy. And to the extent, you know, that you want to tackle climate change and be serious about it, but also make sure that we transition, that we create the good jobs in the economy of the future, then I think it's a really important conversation for all of the premiers. We're also going to be talking in my session about environmental assessments. How do we ensure that good projects go ahead in a timely way? I know that's a great interest to the premiers. And look, I think that, you know, there may be areas of disagreement, but I would hope that everyone, you know, wants to talk about the solutions, how we can tackle climate change, grow the economy, and have, you know, a really good conversation, because I know that certainly is the interest of Canadians.
Well, Ontario says it is interested. It's come forward with its own climate plan. It just doesn't like yours and the way the carbon pricing is put out there. And again, you say the ministers all came together. It's a very different group of ministers now with a very different united approach, and in many cases, not at all in line with what your policy is now. So again, my question is, how do you plan to approach them as you lead this session, facing what could be a hostile, unified front?
Look, I mean, I think that in Canada, we need to have serious conversations about serious issues. This is as much an economic issue as it is an environmental issue. That Canadians are feeling the impacts of climate change in every single province, whether it's floods or forest fires or droughts or extreme heat that's literally killing people. And we have the opportunity to create the good jobs and the solutions of the future. I also see all those solutions across the board. And so I think it's a good opportunity to have a conversation, even if there is disagreement, you know, on some particular pieces of the plan. The climate plan is much bigger than making sure polluting isn't free. It also includes phasing out coal, making investments in clean technologies, moving forward in cleaner transportation, cleaner buildings. So there's a much broader conversation. And as I say, it also includes how do we get our resources to market? And I know that's an extremely important issue for Alberta.
Well, it is, and it's an issue that's now formally on the agenda, and I know so many there want to talk about it. So when you call this an economic issue, at a time when the economy of the energy sector it's in crisis, as Alberta is saying, when Alberta's actually had to take the very drastic step of cutting its production in the energy sector, it is an economic issue. There are some who suggest it's not a time at all to go ahead with carbon tax. Could you defer that? Could you defer the legislation that's going to have an impact on major infrastructure? It's not a time, given the economic uncertainty. Would you contemplate that?
You know, it's actually, in some ways, it's the opposite. When you look at how we're going to get major projects ahead, we've got a problem. The past system didn't work. That's what we've seen that with the Trans Mountain expansion, that we can do better, we need to do better, and our new environmental assessments system is intended to do that. It's intended to work with provinces better. It's intended to make sure that decisions are made in a timely fashion. There's proper consultation with Indigenous peoples, that you take into account the environment, but ensure that good projects go ahead. And we need to do that. We need to get our resources to market. We're a natural resource-based economy, and I understand the challenges that Alberta faces. This is why it is so critically important. And in terms of climate change, we're paying a cost right now. The costs have gone from hundreds of millions of dollars to billions of dollars, and it's just going to continue. And so, you know, we need to figure that out as well. But you can, you know, ensure your resources go to market while you still take action to reduce your emissions and create good jobs. And that's actually what's happening in Canada. I'm pleased that our emissions are going down and our economy is growing. That isn't across the country. Alberta has particular challenges, but we're doing what we need to do. And I'm headed to the climate negotiations in Poland, where I'm going to be pushing for Canada's interests, which is ensuring that other countries report in a transparent way, that they're committed to, taking action to be serious on climate change, because this is a national issue, it's an international issue, it's an environmental issue, it's an economic issue.
So mentioning Poland and COP24, the 24th conference of the parties to the UN Convention on Climate Change, I'm wondering, I want to bring in some images that we've been watching unfold in Paris of late. Mass protests in the streets. The government of Emmanuel Macron brings in a tax on fuel to curtail the use of fuel to further green energy innovation. And you see the explosion that has resulted to that. Macron having to back down from that legislation. Just this week, they're actually closing tourist sites in Paris tomorrow because they're worried that there will be further scenes just like this. The ambitions internationally, governments like Canada's, but the views toward green energy seeming to be wildly disconnected from many people who are actually taking drastic action. Now, I'm not suggesting that Canada would resort to scenes like this, but there's a wide gulf here that doesn't seem to be being addressed by your pursuing the agenda without taking this kind of thing into account.
You know what, we take account the affordability and the economic case, for action on climate change, and also the need to get our resources to market extremely seriously. When we look at how we're putting a price on pollution, 90% of the money goes directly back to families. 10% goes back to support small businesses, reducing emissions, schools, hospital, universities. You have to do things in a way that you can make life affordable. That you create good jobs. And we've been clear that we're in a transition. We still need to get our resources to market. That's the approach that Canadians want. They want us to be smart, taking measures that make sense, that help us reduce emissions, but also create good jobs. And I think a lot of people are thinking about George Bush Sr. He passed away, and he and Brian Mulroney put a price on pollution to tackle the biggest challenge that I remember when I was a kid, acid rain. Right. And guess what? It worked. The businesses were able to tackle the pollution, reduce emissions, and now we have clean water, clean lakes. And that's critically important to remember that we can do this. And that conservative politicians also, believed at least that how the importance of taking action on the environment, but doing it in a way that also made life affordable, that created good jobs. And we can do both, and we need to do both.
Well, the people in Paris don't seem to be believing that. Many in Canada don't seem to be believing it too. How do you think what you've seen in Paris these recent days is going to affect the tone, the tenor, the substance of your discussions in Poland?
Well, look, every time I have a chance to be at these negotiations, I emphasize the importance of people, that everyone has to be part of the transition to a cleaner future, that you need to be supporting workers, that you need to be supporting communities, that you need to be making life affordable. But look, climate change is the biggest risk to our environment, it's the biggest risk to our economy, and it's also something that we need to take action for our kids, that we can't just pass on the huge impacts of climate change, and we can do it in a way that is responsible, that is smart, and that respects the need to, make sure that your life is affordable and that you're creating good jobs. And as I say, that is what we're doing. Our emissions are going down, and our economy is growing, and we're creating jobs. But look, is it a hard conversation? Yes, but I think that Canadians understand that we can't just pass on the costs of climate change to our kids. And we can do it in smart ways that reduce emissions, that make sense, and also take advantage of the huge economic opportunity of clean solutions.
I guess I just keep coming back to the scenes in Paris, Paris of all places, where the accord was signed. And if that is the kind of backdrop that you're seeing in Paris, are there lessons which you run the risk of ignoring?
But look, I think in France they've taken a particular approach, Our approach, as I say, is always focused on people. It's focused on how do we make life affordable. That's why families will get more back than they pay. That's why we're focused on supporting companies that have clean solutions. Those are companies in the oil sands. Those are companies with the game-changing clean solutions. That's why we're investing in public transportation, to help people get around in a cleaner, cheaper, more sustainable way. Look, we can do this. We know what the challenge is, it's pollution, and we know what the opportunity is, that we can ensure a more sustainable future for our kids, and we can position ourselves for the economy of the future. But I'm still going to be pushing to make sure that we get our resources to market.
So
we need to do that. We are a natural resource-based economy.
Yes. Just before I let you go, is at the end of this meeting, will there be a firm commitment? We heard the Prime Minister say to Rosemary Barton, say they're open, you are open to contributing funds to get Alberta to buy those new rail cars and the unit trains. Will there be at the end of today a firm federal commitment to help Alberta pay that cost?
I think, you know what, those are conversations that are going on, and I think our government is committed to Alberta. I mean, look, we now purchased the TMX expansion, the pipeline. You know, we need to be all in this together. We are a great country, we're very diverse, and when a province like Alberta hurts, we're all hurting because it's such a huge contribution to our economy through the energy sector. And so, yes, this is why you need to have these meetings. You have to have serious conversations. Sometimes they are hard conversation, but it's critically important, and that's what Canadians expect.
Catherine McKenna, Minister of the Environment. Minister McKenna, I very much appreciate your time this morning. We'll be listening into the session and covering, of course, what happens in Poland next week. Thank you so much.